everybody, welcome to another episode of What a Helpful Way to Die. It's Francis, and I have with me back again Steve Beynon of militarytimes.com. Steve, how are you doing today?
Good, awesome. Thank you for having me.
If you're listening, you need to understand. For me, it's about noon on a Monday in April, and my neighbor decided that this was the best time to mow and leaf blow and weed whack. It's fucking April, man. Stop it. Let the bees have their food. You know what? It's fine. If you hear droning on in the background, it's not just me. It's also the lawnmower. So I apologize. But other than I can't start a podcast without talking about the weather in some way, shape, or form. It's just kind of become the inside joke. How's the weather where you're at, Steve?
Oh, it's absolutely lovely. I live in a Maryland suburb, not too far out of DC, so you only get like 8 weeks of decent weather until it becomes a humid, swampy nightmare.
Hey, same with us. Move to Missouri, you get the same thing, but shit's cheaper and also
absolutely dreadful. Yeah. So the dogs are enjoying. Dog parks a couple times a week, long walks. So getting the exercise where we can.
Yeah. Well, Steve, I have you on to talk about a couple stories. You are one of my favorite people to bring on because you're always reporting on you're not just juicing the military about how great it is. You call them out on their bullshit. So I got a couple things to talk about. So I do want to start first off, though. You were telling me about some new stuff at Fort Hood. Mm-hmm. And before we get into the stories that you have done at time of this recording, this story will, I imagine, be out by the time this podcast comes out. But go ahead and talk to us, because I know that this is another Vanessa Guillen kind of situation that the military has just kind of decided to ignore?
Yes. So Vanessa Guillen, she died 2 years ago. That served as a flashpoint for the Army and Congress and the media frenzy. There's a Netflix documentary. And in short, it was a shit show for the Army. And then it spurred what most people just refer to as the Fort Hood Report. It was an independent commission that basically wrote 140 pages about why the base is awful and the command climate is failing soldiers. The sexual assault and harassment program has fundamental flaws. And it spent half of that report actually kind of blasting public affairs and general transparency from the base. And not transparency meaning, information to the press, the public, and even the families of these dead soldiers. And last month, another soldier died, Private Anna Ruiz, that was very well covered. Everyone kind of knew about it. Fort Hood had a press conference a couple days after it was out in the media. Congress just sent a letter to Fort Hood basically saying, hey, what's going on with the soldier? But it was an apparent suicide, and she reported some sexual harassment. And we're not quite sure what the details of that was, but this is an apparent suicide. So Private Ruiz died March 13th, and it's very important. Keep that date in mind, right? March 13th. The following day, they have a press conference where they talk all about, the press conference was about 10 minutes and they took 3 questions and they didn't give any details on anything. So going back to that transparency thing, they put out a press release a couple days later, March 16th, just saying, hey, no foul play suspected, right? Now go back to March 13th. Another soldier died that the press, including myself in this, didn't pick up on. Fort Hood had every opportunity to talk about the second soldier, swept it under the rug, didn't tell the press, didn't tell Congress when they started knocking on the door about this other soldier, didn't talk about it in any press releases, seemingly because, hey, this first soldier, Ruiz, echoes a lot of Vanessa Guillen stuff. We know this is going to have bad headlines, and Fort Hood is very sensitive right now. They're very cloistered. They're in a fetal position, saying, "Please don't hit me" when the media comes a knocking. And what's worse than one soldier dying that's under weird Vanessa Guillen-esque circumstances is a second soldier, right? The headlines could have been 2 soldiers died the exact same day. That you could imagine how that media frenzy and inquiries from Congress would just be even more intense. And we have every reason to believe they purposefully swept this under the rug.
So, and for just kind of a peek behind the public affairs.
And that second soldier's name is Specialist Katrina Weigel. I didn't say her name originally, sorry.
So public affairs wise, though, in a situation like this, and this is how I was trained by the Army for public affairs when like some shit like this happens, when like there's obvious like bad things going, is that you get ahead of it. You go and you say, hey, thing happened, here's what we're doing, so that the press isn't knocking at your door, you're knocking at their door saying, hey, this thing happened, here's what we're doing. Go ahead and run the story.
That's even covered in the public affairs FM. There's a paragraph that basically, to sum it up, is like, hey, we don't conceal information just to not be embarrassed.
People on very online love to say that I covered anything up, and like that's literally not anything that public affairs is supposed to do. Now I know that we see public affairs doing it right now, which is bad and not great. I will tell you, I never did any of that, but also I was never involved in any like being PAO during any scandals like this. All the PAO shit that I did was, like it was, hey, we found weapons caches in Afghanistan. Here's what was in it. Cool. I write that up. I send it off to ABC News. They fucking ignore me. And we all move on with our lives. Like,
and to extend the olive branch, it's always difficult to be like, where does public affairs end and the senior chain of command begin? Because they're not going to put anything out the general doesn't like. With that said, there are avenues for public affairs to tell the press things, on background, off the record, and there's backdoor things or backdoor channels to communicate with the press.
Yeah, and very likely there is probably a message that came down from command that said, "You do not talk about this." Otherwise, a general is going to come down and hit you with his stick, and you're never going to see a promotion again.
Yeah. So hey, instead of hey, you know what? They looked at what would have happened. They were like, you know what? If we talk about this other soldier, the story is 2 soldiers died the same day. Something Vanessa Guillen. They just don't like those stories. This is right after the Netflix documentary came out too. So they were like, let's not have that story. So instead, this month they get the story that they covered it up. So that's what they chose to do. And you know what? You gotta sleep in the bed you made.
And again, appreciative of people like you, and we have Davis on, Seth Harp, Jasper Craven,
all great people,
Haley Britsky, Sarah Sakar. I don't think I had Sarah on for anything in necessarily serious, but all people who like go and hold this kind of shit, hold the Army's feet to the fire, because if you don't, they'll just get away with it. Like they will, the government will just cover shit up. Like that's not anything new, which I'm sure everybody knows. There's at least some conspiracy theories that you believe that are probably correct.
Yeah, and obviously, you cover the Army, and the biggest thing when you do that is where does the cover up end, and where is you're just stupid begin? Because
Exactly.
sometimes it's just you're dumb.
Right.
That's the end result of a lot of stories I look into.
Right. It's just like, why did you guys step on your own dicks? That would have been a lot less terrible. And again, another thing that you learn in the military is like the best way to avoid trouble is to go up and say, hey, I fucked up. Here's where I fucked up, and here's how we're going to fix it. Like literally, as just a regular soldier, if you break something and you just were like, well, maybe if I don't say anything, nobody will figure it out. Somebody's going to figure it out because there's only like 10 of you in the shop. And
cover up is always worse than the crime.
Yeah, and nobody else wants to get in trouble for your dumb ass. So they're gonna be like, yeah, Private Snuffy, tripped and broke that thing. So if you just go and you're like, look, I broke the thing. Here's what we're doing.
I'll extend the olive branch here, and well, I wouldn't call it an olive branch. I'll call it an understanding of doing why you did the wrong thing. So I did a lot of Alaska coverage last year. We did an episode on it. And a lot of that was, hey, there seemed to be a spike of suicides in Alaska. It's like, why are all these suicides going on? And you kind of look at the data, and you kind of look at some other bases, and I haven't seen any reason to believe that soldiers in Alaska are more or less likely to commit suicide than other installations. Maybe it's slightly higher, but Alaska overall is a higher volume of that because it's Alaska. But I didn't see anything particular wrong with like Fort Wainwright. That stood out. The problem with Alaska was, and how it became known as like the suicide base, is because they actually put out press releases when soldiers died. They were almost like a victim of their own transparency. But when those news stories, for myself, USA Today talked about it a lot too. they stopped putting those releases out. And Congress is asking a lot of questions, but that is from the public affairs perspective of when transparency goes wrong, because they're kind of doing the right thing. And you look at other places like Fort Bragg, Fort Carson, they probably have the exact same issues. And there's like, yeah, we're not going to do what they're doing because we don't want the press and Congress knocking on our door.
Fort Bragg wishes they just had people killing themselves because they're sad. Like,
yeah, Fort Bragg. Yeah, we're gonna have to do another episode just on Fort Bragg one day down the road.
There should be a monthly fucking episode on Fort Bragg to be just like, hey, we need to update. Like the guy who lists all the Russian material losses in Ukraine. Just like we need a Fort Bragg material losses of like another Navy SEAL fucking held his own kid hostage for some reason, but also he's shipping off to Somalia. So I guess we've taken care of that problem. He's going to go put guns to the heads of kids we don't like instead of his own kids.
But yeah, no, hey, that Fort Hood story should be out definitely by the time this is out. It should be coming out today. Hopefully.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, let's also talk about some things that are out already.
Yes.
2 stories that come from you from military.com. The first one is something that I know we've talked about. I probably talked about it with you before. The threat of extremist groups is growing, and service members and vets are getting sucked into the violence, which has been a very known issue in the government. Like it's not hard to show up and just have like a 1488 tattoo and a recruiter either not know or not care, and then just kind of go ahead, get into the army. And they get into the army, they get basic infantry tactic training, which is it's not going to make you a super soldier, but it's still like basic tactics that if you take it back and you train your own 12-man group, you could be a very dangerous military group in that kind of situation. So what's our updates here? What's going on with this, and is the government trying to do anything to stop it?
No, the government is not doing anything to stop this. We've been
why would they stop their own people?
We've been looking into this for over a year. Our findings aren't probably are not surprising. We've talked to extremists, almost any notable expert on the issue, law enforcement, Pentagon officials. The bottom line is veterans and service members are not more or less likely to be radicalized than anyone in the general population, or at least there's no data to suggest that's the case. But once they are in these groups, these groups try to recruit, or they're more likely to try to be recruited. These groups go after vets and service members. And then once they're there, they serve as force multipliers. They bring credibility to these groups, and they bring training to these groups. You mentioned it, like an infantry private. Think about what the infantry private knows. They know a rifle needs to be zeroed. They know when you move, you need to put fire down so half your other team can, cover and move. They know the very basic military planning process. You need to do some reconnaissance. You know how you're going to get there. You need communication. And hey, bring some water. This all sounds super simple and stupid.
Right. Especially to other soldiers. But your average civilian doesn't know I'm up, he sees me, I'm down, 3 to 5 second rushes, things that are like, yeah, it's really basic information to the rest of us, but it's like reading Sun Tzu's The Art of War. Like, I'm a soldier, all that shit makes sense to me, but I can understand that like a civilian be like, oh wow, this is such great, military information that we're getting here. It's like, yeah, when you're close, make the enemy think that you're far away. I can see how if you've never been involved in a war, that can seem like really inspiring to you. But for the most part, it can, these basic information can be dangerous. If you watch any any group of soldiers, any, bunch of infantry guys, and all you need is one buck sergeant who everybody knows to shut up and listen to. That's a dangerous group. They know how to shoot, move, and communicate. That's dangerous, especially outside of a war zone and in my Walmart.
Yeah, and we don't know what the scope of the issue is in the services right now. I mean, the DoD, frankly, doesn't look into this issue. They will tout they had like their extremism stand down after January 6th, which boiled down to a check the block, like, hey, don't join the neo-Nazis, which most units just blew off anyway. And any insider threat stuff, it just hasn't been modernized. We're still talking about things like it's the Cold War or radical Islamic terror and stuff like that. And while those things are still out there and things people need to think about, they're not thinking about what the actual threat is right now. And it's not me saying this, the FBI says this. It's far right domestic terrorism. And the reason the Army doesn't talk about it that much, or any of the services, is because they're walking on eggshells, because they're terrified of Republicans on the Hill. And it's very hard to negotiate this issue if you want to be perceived as a nonpartisan actor, because the truth in the situation is partisan. And then because to go after this issue, you almost kind of have to talk about the very basis of conservatism. And I don't think it's a coincidence. A lot of these people are slowly radicalized. You start with Fox News, which is, it's not just, hey, here's the news from a conservative angle, where we complain about the estate tax. Like the things they say now, it's not the Fox News of the early 2000s or the 90s. It's pretty radical stuff. And then they graduate to harder and harder drugs. If Fox News is Jack and Coke, and eventually maybe down the road you're doing heroin with Candace Owens,
it just turns into Coke.
Yeah, it just turns into Coke.
Yeah, I do remember when I was in Afghanistan in 2004, we had AFN News in the office, and I would watch Bill O'Reilly, and it's like, well, I don't agree with everything he's saying, but he wasn't saying anything that was like,
it wasn't radical,
right?
Yeah.
Because, and to be fair, they were in charge. Bush was president. We were in the middle of a war. It was all that rhetoric of war and stuff. But he wasn't saying, like, there are no normal Republicans anymore. There are no more just like, I pay too much in taxes, and we should give less money to, I don't know, who, PBS or whatever. Like, it is, although I know giving less money to PBS is a big thing at the moment, but it's all just culture war bullshit. There's no more like actual policy other than we hate transgender people because that's a firebrand issue that does absolutely nothing for anybody. In Missouri, they have banned transgender kids from playing sports in high school, doing literally nothing for the hundreds of thousands of kids in Missouri who are hungry on a regular basis. But at least a trans kid can't play soccer again, and everybody feels bad because they lost to a trans kid. I don't know. But that is like, there are no more normal conservatives anymore.
And that's why you're just not going to see the DoD attack this issue in any meaningful way, because it's impossible to talk about the situation honestly without talking about just what is the state of Republican politics these days. But it's even more difficult to tango with, because, well, what do you actually do? Like, do you screen these recruits? Do you go through the social media and what is considered radical? That's an incredibly subjective thing, especially to some, like, okay, you give the responsibility of the E6 recruiter, and they're supposed to know like the terminologies the Boogaloo Boys use. Like, I don't think that's going to work out. Or like, unless this guy straight up has pictures on Instagram of him in a white robe.
I mean, that would it would be nice if we had at least that amount of kind of screening. But
at the same, we don't even have that. That's fair. We can probably start there and go,
Yeah. At the same time, though, that I heard plenty of times from E6s and aboves about how like, we should just, nuke the Middle East into a glass parking lot and that'll solve all of our problems. The offhanded like, what if we just did a genocide and then we didn't have to do this anymore? Which is, as a casual kind of thing, that's incredibly fucked up to say. And you gotta, and nobody's going to call anybody out on that. Nobody's going to say, hey, like, Sergeant, the fuck you talking about? You can't say that shit, because you can say it all you want and nobody really cares. And that's why, like, as you said, this radicalism is allowed to stay, because, to be fair, on the whole, the military is very well, and I don't know, because I've seen plenty of reports that come out about how, a good portion of like even the enlisted people identify as Democrats. Or vote Democrat, identify as, not on the right. I don't want to say leftist, but not on the hardcore, hard-coded right. But at the same time, those people are also very comfortable with saying incredibly fucked up things, calling, using slurs for the local nationals that are just, kind of considered normal, or saying we need to nuke the place into a glass parking lot. And those things are never challenged. And especially now, I imagine if you're the E4 trying to tell the E6 like, hey Sarge, you can't say that, you're just going to get called a woke soy boy or something like that, and
Yeah.
then you're going to have a shitty quarterly counseling statement. You're not going to get buck sergeant. So
Yeah.
again, you shut the fuck up, because you know that if you start making waves, it's not going to go well for you.
Yeah, and kind of what I found here is just to oversimplify for the sake of conversation is the consistent theme I found with these guys that fall into these groups, and I say guys because it's overwhelmingly men, is that they are failing in some major part of their life. That's usually economic, romantic, or professional, one of those things. Or they have boring lives, and this is it's almost an outlet. It's something that makes their life more exciting. They fall into these radical bubbles, entertainment bubbles, podcasts, or 4chan, or whatever they're looking at.
Yeah,
and then actually join these groups for the camaraderie that makes your life immediately more exciting. Like there is a guy I covered, Jeremy Brown, retired from special forces, and I talked to some people that worked with him, and otherwise a pretty good soldier. And he just kind of fell down that, he got divorced, lost his kids, and just kind of went down this rabbit hole and training in the woods by himself to fight the government. And now he's, at the Capitol trying to, overthrow the government and keep Trump in power. I think it's the people largely sad. They lose something in life, and I wish there was a more journalistic word, but they're just kind of losers. I haven't found an example of a guy who's handsome, has money, great wife and kids, good friend circle, who's also carrying a Confederate flag and shitting on Nancy Pelosi's desk.
That would probably just be Josh Hawley, but
well, he's probably he's also one of the most hated men on. I don't know how successful he is. He might go into the social category of failure.
He's like Ted Cruz. Nobody actually likes him, but people vote for him because he's the red guy. And all of this kind of goes into when you get out of the military, there's always these the classes that you have to take to transition into civilian life, how to get a job, how to get healthcare, blah blah blah, because you're no longer being the welfare queen soldier that you are, sucking off the teat of the taxpayer. But I've always believed that one thing that we should be doing is, like, when you get out, like we have like a package of like 10 different things that, like, just hobbies, like ready to go hobbies, like, and just after a couple of interviews, you're like, okay, you answered these 5 questions. Here is a set of paints, a magnifying glass that can be mounted on your table, and 10 Warhammer 40K minifigures. Go paint them and see how you feel about that. Here is a just basic turntable that can be plugged into a USB, and just 5 random albums that came out 30 years ago. Get into collecting vinyl. See what you can do there, because a lot of this is also just like not having anything else better to do.
Yeah,
and
there is something dangerous about bored white guys who are mad at the world. There's something about bored white guys mad at the world, and like I talked to the academic experts and law enforcement on this, and there's a lot of red flags, but the problem is once you kind of start seeing the red flags, that you've kind of lost them at that point. And for anyone that wants to know to combat this or wants to keep an eye out for their soldiers or their friends, that's what you really, a bored white guy that spends a little too much time on the internet is kind of, I think that's your red flag.
Yeah, or if you're a bored white guy that spends too much time on the internet, you become a lefty shitposter podcaster. So,
also possible.
It's more than likely you're going to go the other way, but there is that 20% chance that you just turn into me, which is better because I'm not abusive, but not better on a social aspect, I imagine.
Yeah, I think bottom line is, everyone needs a job, everyone needs a hobby, get a dog. If you're not getting dates on Tinder, maybe look at yourself and see if you're brushing your teeth as much as you should be, and if you're boring or not, and just kind of work on that.
Right. If you need a masculinity coach, don't go to Andrew Tate. Come to me, and I'll just tell you, just like I will. And here's the thing: I'm not going to tell you that you're doing anything wrong. I'm just going to tell you ways that, just like places that I see that you can be the best person that you are. And that's what we're concerned about here at Hell of a Way to Die, is to make sure that you are being the best you. And maybe that means you need to wash your stank ass, but wash it, and then you can be the best you. And then
listen. I see some people on the dating apps like have a lot of success. And listen, if you're having a tough time, I promise it's not because you're ugly. There's something else going on that you could, lose 10 pounds, get an interesting hobby, wear a shirt that fits better. There's adjustments you can make on the margins that'll, But maybe this is when we start our offshoot dating advice show.
Yeah, and if you're gonna be like a gun dude, like be a gun dude that is a nerd. Like I'm in a gun chat on Twitter, and they're all fucking nerds, and I love them. They're all gun nerds. They're talking about single action, double actions. They're talking about putting different triggers into things and how they like the pull. They're talking about trigger safeties versus manual safeties versus no safeties. It's all this like little minutia stuff that we all kind of argue about, but we're all in good fun. We're all normal, and everybody's just like, yeah, okay, we like guns, we don't like cops, and we think trans people should exist. And
you mean you can have a gun club that's not just like cringe,
right? Like, just go find yourself that gun club. Go find yourself a club of like normal dudes and not people who are like, I hate the government. Because like this special forces guy, he was in the army for 20 fucking years, and it's just like, well, time to overthrow the government that I. But like that doesn't make sense to me, other than, as you said, being radicalized and thinking Donald Trump for some reason is some sort of golden god sent upon high to do racism across the world for you. So if you got soldiers that are getting out, or if you're getting out yourself, find a hobby. Find a hobby that isn't playing video games or drinking beer. Those hobbies are, the only acceptable ones is if you're designing video games or if you're brewing beer. You absolutely should get into beer brewing. Like that is like, if you've got the brain for it, you just got to find the thing that like lights up your brain the right way. Some people it's painting minifigs, some people it's brewing beer, some people it's, knowing the specific weight of a draw hammer on a Glock 19 with an aftermarket pistol. Those are all like kind of at least, not scary. If your thing is I'm going to run around in the woods and do really bad G.I. Joe shit because I hate the government, that's weird. Don't
listen. Yeah, you know what the litmus test is? Think about like a relatively successful relationship you had, and pretend you're telling your girlfriend what you're into, what your one of your old girlfriends what you do now, and if you think she would think it's weird, it probably is.
Or well, I don't want to say that because painting Warhammer 40K figurines is pretty fucking weird too. But all right. Here's the thing: would somebody
I'll take that recommendation back? I'm thinking about the guy running around in the woods with guns trying to fight the government.
Yeah, if the ex would look at you, just be like, "Are you okay?" That's when it is. Yes. If you're painting Warhammer 40K things, you are specifically placated, I would say, and not necessarily. And this is not to say like, oh, as soon as you start painting figurines, you're going to not care about politics and stuff. You absolutely will. It's just you won't be as angry, and also like when you are angry, you'll have something to go do to make you not angry, which is paint little minifigs in your basement.
Yeah. Like I said, I think that's the bottom line here. Is these dudes like people want to overly complicate this issue, and I'm just like, I think it's bored people that it got out of control.
Yep, bored people and no direction to put a lot of that out. Well, Steve, let's switch gears one more time to another story that you have that came out on the 14th of April. Soldiers are away from home now more than ever, despite no major ongoing wars. Yes. This, I was floored kind of by this. I know that we have a lot of work that's happening in Africa. Some of it's secret, some of it not so secret. But, when I think of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, I think about, I was in Afghanistan in 2004 when we had like 12,000 people there. And I think about when we were in Iraq, when I was there during kind of post-surge, but still had, tens of thousands of troops there. So I always think about those times, the stories of people saying, I've got, in 20 years, I got deployed 8, 9, 10 times. That's why my brain's all fucked up. But what's going on now? Where are we sending soldiers if we're not shooting people?
That's a great question. So this really stuck out to me. There was a hearing on the Hill a couple weeks ago. I think it's just on the budget or something. And during General McConville's test, he's the top officer in the Army, and he just made this offhand comment and be like, "Oh, we got 180,000 soldiers deployed around the world." And I'm just like, that's a really high fucking. And I'm like, well, and then in my head instantly, I'm like, okay, well, even if that attests for soldiers permanently stationed like Germany, Italy, that number is still really high because that's only a couple thousand people. So I go to the army and I'm like, hey, what's the real number here? I don't care about people permanently stationed in places, right? So like who is deployed or temporarily somewhere, rotational or whatever. And then they give me this number. It's about 120,000.
Holy shit.
And that does not include like Second ID permanently stationed in South Korea or the 173rd Airborne in Italy. This is people on just general deployments and rotations.
120,000 people are deployed.
The army is a little over 1 million people once you include the reserve and the guard, like the total army. So that's about basically 10% of the army is somewhere right now temporarily.
And this isn't even like people who are out in the field or people who are doing that, doing an NTC rotation.
That's where it gets deeper. Yeah.
This like an NTC rotation is whatever. That's 3 or 4 weeks. It sucks. Everybody has to do it at least once in their life, and we all have good stories about it. I mean, I didn't do it, but the rest of you had to, I'm sure. I also went to JRT. I didn't go to JRTC, so the rest of you guys can suck.
We both lucked out. I was going to go to NTC, but then the pandemic happened and it got canceled. So I
went to NTC I went to Irwin when I was 19, so it must have been 2001, 2. But I know I wasn't able to drink. I wasn't old enough to drink.
Sad.
Well, I mean, I got shit faced. Because we were sharing a barracks with a mechanic unit from the Virgin Islands.
And those guys throw down.
Oh my fucking God. They brought a duffel bag of their own rum because they knew they weren't going to get anything good at the PX at Irwin. But I was at Irwin. I was stationed on Irwin, but I never went to the box. So, I've been to Irwin, but I've not been to quote NTC. So I don't have my stories of NTC are more about the weird goth dude that kept showing up at every, cause there's only one place to drink on post, and we went to the bowling alley every night. And there's one kid, I swear he must have been like the kid of somebody who's permanent party, which I cannot imagine a worse thing to do than to be a 17-year-old stuck on Fort Irwin because your parents. But that boy showed up to every themed night at the bowling alley, dressed up in a goth version of whatever it was. So he was making it work. Showed up.
I wonder where he's at. I want to interview him.
Yeah,
we need to track him down.
20 years ago, if you were wearing a goth cowboy's outfit at during country night at the bowling alley in Fort Irwin, hit me up.
Yeah. So, so 120,000 troops or just soldiers are deployed in various places around the world. And compare that. Here's the number we need to compare it to. The peak of the Afghanistan-Iraq wars was 2008. That was 187,900 troops. And that is with every single branch, not just the Army. The 120,000 number we're talking about is just the Army. And right now, the Army is 70,000 soldiers less than it was in 2008. So I know that's a lot of numbers. So the bottom line is a smaller Army is doing a mission load that the entire military was doing in 2008. And that number, that really high number, the 187,000, 2008, I mean, that fluctuated a lot right after and a lot right before. Because right before, Afghanistan wasn't a really big deal as well. Iraq, 2008 is when we really liked both wars. And then Iraq died down quickly after that. So that is just the most extreme example. So for most of GWAT, the Army is doing more right now.
Which is kind of flabbergasting, because the big thing that a lot of people complained about was the insane up tempo that we had during the war, and up tempo, operational tempo, which means how many times, how often you have to be deployed, how often you have to, move around. Like, the Army is terrible to soldiers. Even when the Army is not specifically being a shithead to you, it's just a shithead to you, because it's just shitty in general. Like, hey, guess what? You are established here. Your kids got friends in schools, and your wife has a job. Guess what? You're going to go move across the country because we just do that every 2 fucking years. Because why not? We're going to PCS you. So, and I mean, things like that also go along with this. Like, you're just never like, you can't set down roots anywhere. And I really feel like that's important. everybody has their childhood roots, but you also need adulthood roots. You need, post high school, you're 18, you are now an adult. You have to start putting roots down in another way. I continued my roots in St. Louis because at the age of 18, up through, the rest of my 20s, I was going to shows, drinking in various bars, meeting various people. I put the roots down there. You can't do that in the Army.
Yeah. And this isn't even accounting, like you said, it doesn't count for CTCs. And on top of this, like soldiers, they got to go to schools for promotion. They got to go to random schools, air assault, airborne, random different credentials. And also just general field time and gunnery and stuff like that. So you add all that in. Like I talked to about a dozen soldiers. I led with this one sergeant I chatted with. He's an infantry guy, Ranger tab, expert infantry badge, Chebit medals, air assault, airborne. Like this guy is high speed, wants to get after it. But he's been in the Army for about 4 years, cumulatively been at home for about 4 months total. And this is a guy that wants to get after it. And he's just like, listen, I don't mind deploying. I like going to the field. I'm down, right? I'm down to go shoot. It's awesome. This is what I'm here for. But like, fun. And he's just like, I'm just asking for like one less thing, like he did 2 CTC rotations in a year. And he's like, maybe just like one less, let's say we spend, 4 months cumulatively in the field. If you add it all over a year, maybe like 3 months. And I feel like we could still fight as good as we do now.
So where are we sending 120,000 soldiers?
Great question. So, Europe's the big thing right now. Poland and Romania, we got thousands of troops there. We got about anywhere between 8 to 12,000. The Pentagon's been like kind of wishy-washy on the data. We got training teams in Taiwan. We got a huge presence in Africa, mostly in Djibouti. We're building up a presence across the Pacific. I mean, basically, you name a continent, the Army's involved. And then we got all these legacy missions. We got these weird legacy missions. Like we still got a ton of soldiers in Kosovo. I don't know what we're doing in Kosovo.
I was going to ask about that because when I joined, that was the deployment. Is you went to Bosnia. Yeah. And that was always really close to me because all the Bosnian refugees came to St. Louis. Yeah. And I was like, oh, it'd be cool if I could, see where you guys are from and, be a part of this, quote, peacekeeping mission or something. But yeah, it's been 25 years since then.
Yeah. What are you doing? What are you doing there in 2023? Like, I don't even understand. Like, I couldn't find anyone that's in Kosovo or went there recently to ask them, like, listen, like, what do you do? Like, I know you don't do anything in Kuwait, but there's like a tactical reason to have a presence in Kuwait that you could at least like tell me on paper from a Pentagon perspective that obviously the soldiers roll their eyes at, but there's like an on paper reason. I don't know what the on paper reason is for Kosovo. I don't know what problem we're solving there, but yeah, but we also got people in Kuwait. You know what the new Kosovo mission is? This is Iraq and Syria. That's a huge National Guard mission right now. We got thousands of troops there. So we got these legacy GWAT missions. We got these random legacy missions from the 90s. And then we got new stuff like the Pacific and Europe. And the Army, anytime it seems to start a mission, they just, like Kosovo, they can't get rid of it, right? And now they're in Europe, and it goes back to the bang for buck. Like if we have 12,000 soldiers in Europe, I mean, is Vladimir Putin really going to invade France if we have 9,000? Like, do we need all of them? And why do we have rotational forces in South Korea if we have a permanent division there?
Right. I mean, it is all just like projection of power and projection of empire. That we can't, like, the only country we've ever been able to like truly let go of is Afghanistan, and it took us 20 years, and it was
we were getting shot at on the way out. Like,
right, they were fucking killing us on the way out, and because that hot little potato
we got kicked out of Afghanistan.
Yeah, we did. We're leaving, and there's we quit. Like, no, you're fired, kind of thing. And so we don't have a presence in Afghanistan,
and then we still got people in Egypt. Like,
we got them in Iraq. We got
them in Iraq. We got Egypt. We got, I mean, and this is also, this includes like, and this makes sense. Like every Guard state has like a state partner. So when I was in the Ohio Guard, ours was Hungary, and we go there for like, or 2 weeks in the summer and go train with like the Hungarians or other like European armies. And it's like cool. And it makes a lot of sense, but that's like, it's temporary. It's maybe 2 weeks to a month, but that is included in this number.
You're going to go hang out at Seb Gorka's Eagle's Nest.
Oh God, Jesus! I mean, maybe after a couple drinks just to come back here and tell you what happened. But yeah, and that's kind of the bottom line. And maybe the story demands a follow up kind of on your question of just like all these missions in a vacuum, or some of them make sense. Like you got to go to the CTC. It makes sense for us to project some power in Poland. I get it. Africa, sure, special operations does stuff there, but they need some like footprint of conventional forces to gate guard for them. Sure. The Pacific makes sense to trade on some islands if we think we're going to fight China. Sure, whatever. But it's when all this stuff is added together, and then on top of the random things like Kosovo, like we have 400 members of the Indian National Guard there. It doesn't really contribute too much statistically, but it's just like all those little things just add up to this insane number. It's like an alcoholic, man. It's hey, a couple drinks here and there, sure, but all of a sudden you blink and you've drank every day for 2 weeks, and it's like, what are we doing here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is a we just don't have the ability to like we don't have an end goal for anything. Like we
can't quit the empire.
Right. We went into Afghanistan and it's like, well, what's our goals? It's like, well, to stop the Al-Qaeda from doing terrorism there. Like, but that's not a thing. Like, go fucking to Saudi Arabia. They were all Saudi Arabians that did the thing. No, we're just going to kick in doors in Afghanistan for some reason. And there's no like end goal there. There's no like, all right, we're going to be in Bosnia and Herzegovina and Kosovo to prevent genocide, to do more to make sure that these things don't happen. And it's like, that's great, but like, does the presence of American troops, is that what's stopping people from killing each other? Or is it because they've signed some treaties, or they've figured some shit out, or maybe they've just learned to live with it and they know that if they start up a genocide again, we might come and kick their doors down again? But why do we need to have people specifically there? Like, nobody needs to point a gun at Yugoslavia anymore. It's gone. It's done. Like, there's no reason to be. And I know the Balkans will be the Balkans, but that's not really there's no reason for an American military presence there. And like, yeah. I definitely don't want everybody to start, shooting at each other again. And if we pulled out and that started to happen, okay, I can now see the reasons and the why we would want people, military there. But I just don't really see that being a thing that happened. Look, I don't know about the Balkans in 2023. I don't know. So maybe it is, but I would love to see some kind of mission statements, some kind of ideas of like, here's what we're doing, and here's what it looks like when we're done. When the United States Army can leave, this is what it's going to look like.
Like some of it comes across as just like we have these missions for almost the sake of training. You think about military logistics. It takes a lot to get a unit of soldiers from A to B, and the Guard gets this training of sending soldiers from Indiana to Kosovo, transporting them, getting weapons over there. I'm sure they have to go through some little like mobilization. Same with Iraq and Syria. The Ohio National Guard has the 37th Infantry Brigade combat team there. What are they doing? I don't know if they're doing a lot, but it takes, they're there, they get all this funding for training. That's just almost what is coming across. And all these soldiers I talked to, like that Ranger Tab infantryman I told you about earlier, they're all down to deploy. Like they're down to go to war. But they don't want to stand in Kuwait for a year. Mm-hmm. It's just like, I'm okay to leave my family and serve the country, but and that's what I joined to do. But I didn't join to, sit on my ass and do dip in Poland.
Mm-hmm. Which is like fun for a week, but when it's your gear, it's not.
That's so much time away from your family.
Right. Mm-hmm. So I would love, and hopefully you can dig some more up about what exactly the Army is doing in various places. Probably not. They will probably not tell you a damn thing, but it is it's a problem. It's a problem that the Army is just going to get worse. Like, we're going to continue to project power. We're going to suddenly need, hey, we need 1,000 troops here. We need to send troops down to Brazil for some reason. And then suddenly we're doing more inside of South America, a place the United States Army has always had great relationships and great history with the people of Central and South America. Certainly planes full of cocaine and weapons. Everybody wants to deliver like that. Mm-hmm. If only Amazon could do that for us.
Yeah.
Steve, thank you for coming on. What else do you have in the pipelines coming up?
Oh man, you know what? We got a good story about a commander being fired from the 5th SVAB coming up. He seemed to be a toxic leader. So, I mean, it'll be up by the time that this podcast is up. So I asked folks to check that out. And, we've talked about mold before. Mold continues to be a big issue. You'll see other angles for that coming up and how it's impacting soldiers' health and how the Army is just not moving on the issue as fast as they could. And you'll also see some stuff about, hey, you know what? Congress wanted the Army to change the fitness test. The Army's not doing it because Congress's law didn't specify test.
Which, I don't know who to back. I don't know which horse to back on that one, if it's the Army or Congress. Because, I've always been like, yeah, the push-up, sit-ups, 2-mile run is dumb, and I like this new PT test. I think that it has, a lot of potential, and I think it's a lot better of a idea of what a soldier can do in combat. I'm sure that the Congress is just like, nope, it's too woke. You need to take the wokeness out of it.
They passed a law in the last NDA that says the Army needs to have gender neutral fitness standards. And the Army looked at that and be like, well, I don't see the phrase Army combat fitness tests in here. And so we're not going to change anything. And we have our regulations that don't specify gender on things soldiers are supposed to be able to do.
Yeah, the government,
which I kind of respect, seeing a task and what the commander's intent is, but be like, you didn't write it down, so fuck it.
I don't want to do this, and technically I don't have to. So why don't you come back a little bit later?
Yeah, so Matt Gaetz needs to be a little bit more specific.
Yeah, Steve, where can people find you?
Well, people can find me on Twitter and on military.com. If you see Army stories there, I probably wrote it. And I always ask people, reach out anytime you see or hear anything in the Army you think I need to look into, and I'll definitely be looking into it.
Great. Steve, thank you so much. Everybody, thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks.